If you were left to survive in the jungle, how long do you think you can last? In 1972, a Japanese man was found in the jungles of Guam, an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. He was a soldier from the Imperial Japanese Army who had been living off the land on the island, not knowing that Japan had lost the Second World War. This man had been holding out on Guam for close to 28 years, waiting for the day reinforcements would arrive. The man, now 57 years of age, was flown back to Japan for the first time in decades. Japan was no longer the war-torn country he had once known. It was now an industrialized nation. But the first words out of his mouth was not relief, nor impression towards the progress his country had made. He simply claimed to be ashamed for losing the war and coming back alive. This is the story of Yokoi Shoichi. Yokoi Shoichi was born in 1915. At 15 years of age, he got a job working as a tailor, obtaining skills in sewing and needlework. In 1935, when Yokoi was 20 years old, he was drafted into the Imperial Japanese Army and fought in various theaters ranging from China to the Pacific, and was eventually stationed on the island of Guam in 1944. The string of Pacific islands including Guam, which Japan was occupying at the time, was part of the Absolute Defense Line. The Empire of Japan deemed this line to be defended at all costs, because if the Allies were to take control of these islands, that would put Tokyo and other major cities on mainland Japan within range of B-29 bombers. Although Japan stationed many men on these islands, they would eventually be overrun by the Allies. Out of the 20,000 men stationed on Guam, only 1,300 or so were able to make it back to Japan, a fatality rate of 93%, an indication of just how fierce the combat was in the area. It is said that even after the Allies took effective control of the island, thousands of Japanese soldiers held up in the jungle, as they were taught never to surrender, and that the Allies were known to brutally torture and kill any prisoners they caught. Yokoi held the rank of sergeant, and along with his 4 subordinates ran into the jungle as the Japanese were overrun by the Allies in the summer of 1944, less than half a year since he arrived on the island. When the war ended in August of 1945, there were repeated broadcasts by loudspeaker into the jungle, stating that the war was over and that any former soldiers can come out safely. But Yokoi believed these broadcasts to be propaganda by the Allies, an attempt to lure out and capture any remaining Japanese. He also firmly believed that even though Japan had temporarily lost Guam, reinforcements would soon arrive to liberate them. In 1946, already 2 years into surviving in the jungle, 2 of his men gave up and turned themselves in to the Americans. That left Yokoi and 2 others to live on their own for the next few decades. The first year or 2 was tough. They would often run out of food, being forced to eat rats and slugs, and consequently suffering from food poisoning. But eventually Yokoi and his men would establish methods to obtain food and water. In the few months between when he was stationed in Guam to when the Allies arrived, Yokoi had good relations with the locals, and had learned many skills from them in that brief period of relative peace. Yokoi would gradually apply these skills to survive in the jungle. For example, the island of Guam, being a tropical island, has a near infinite supply of water in rivers and lakes. But Yokoi would later claim he didn't drink water directly from these sources, not once in the 28 years he was there, as drinking water directly from rivers can cause disease, something he had learned from the local islanders. Instead, he got the majority of his drinking water from coconuts. He had also learned how to prepare and eat the coconuts themselves, a precious source of nutrition. They would salvage canteens and other equipment left behind by the army, and create handmade pots and pans, as well as traps to catch fish, rabbits, and other small animals. By the time a few years had passed, they would be harvesting various nuts and berries. Eventually, they even figured out how to extract oil from nuts to fry food, and how to ferment berries to create alcohol. Yokoi would put the skills he learned working as a tailor to good use as well. He would use the fibers from coconuts to make clothing, which were of such high quality it was hard to believe it was made in the wilderness. In the year 1964, 2 decades since they had begun holding out in the jungle, one of the men decided they had waited long enough, and maybe reinforcements were not coming after all. Therefore, they should make a raft to escape the island. They had to scope out the shoreline beforehand to see where there may be gaps in the American positions, and for the first time in 20 years ventured out of the jungle, and they were shocked at what they saw. Guam was now a modern resort, with buildings higher than anything they had ever seen, with cars and machinery that was like something out of the future. Keep in mind they had been cut off from civilization for decades, so for them it was really like traveling through time into the future. Whatever hopes they had left were crushed on this day. They would never be able to sneak past the Americans with a raft, and in the bigger picture, there was no way Japan could win a war against such an advanced civilization. Up to this point, the 3 men had worked together as a team, as they were a unit in the army. But after this day, they would gradually drift apart. Because Yokoi was several years older than the other 2 men, he never quite got along with them, and decided to go live on his own from here on. In the summer of that year, a massive typhoon hit Guam, destroying their food supplies. Yokoi became worried of the 2 others, and when he eventually went to check in on them, he found their lifeless bodies. It was not clear if their cause of death was starvation or disease, but in any case, Yokoi felt tremendous guilt for leaving his men and letting them die. He vowed to bring their remains back to Japan, and this newfound purpose motivated him to do whatever it takes to survive. After another 8 years had passed, in January of 1972, a group of locals ran into him when he was setting a trap in the river. One of these locals had his brothers killed by another Japanese soldier hiding in the jungle many years ago, and when he recognized Yokoi as a member of the Japanese army, he raised his rifle, ready to fire. But the other members of the group talked him out of it, so instead Yokoi was captured and turned in to authorities. On February 2nd, 1972, Yokoi was flown back to Japan, along with the remains of his 2 men. His first words expressed shame for coming back alive, while the majority of his fellow servicemen had perished in the battle on Guam. For a while, cameras would follow him wherever he went, and he was filmed sobbing in front of his mother's grave. Yokoi's mother had passed away, believing her son had died in battle somewhere on Guam. On the bright side, Yokoi didn't have much trouble getting back on his feet in Japan. He became somewhat of a celebrity, appearing in many TV shows, publishing best-selling books, and he even got married within a year of coming back. Yokoi would continue to live out the rest of his life in Japan, until suffering a heart attack in 1997, at the age of 82. It is said he never got used to eating raw food due to his food poisoning experiences on Guam, and would avoid popular Japanese cuisine such as sushi and sashimi. After his death, his wife created a simple museum at their house, where anyone could visit free of charge. It displayed recreations of the hole he lived in, and various pieces of self-made equipment and clothing. The museum was operational until 2020, but was closed due to the pandemic. Because Yokoi's wife passed away in 2022, the museum is to be taken down, and the items that were on display are planned to be shipped to various museums in Japan and Guam. What do you think of Yokoi and his story? Could you have held out close to 30 years on an island in the middle of nowhere? Or would you have turned yourself in to the Americans at some point? Let me know in the comments below. There is another prominent case of a Japanese soldier surviving on a Pacific island, in which a man by the name of Onoda came back to Japan after holding out in the Philippines for close to 30 years. But that's a story for another day. A big thank you to Korbachu and my other Patreons for supporting this channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you for watching until the end. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. I'll see you next time.